Trade war with American allies. Tariffs on imported goods are now at their highest levels since the Great Depression. 59% of Canadians officially declare a boycott of U.S. products. The bankruptcy rate in the U.S. food retail sector is up 240% year over year. A silent but determined boycott campaign is unfolding across Canadian supermarkets, triggering an unprecedented crisis for the U.S. food industry. From Ontario to Alberta, American goods once dominant in the distribution system are being shunned by Canadian consumers en masse, causing a domino collapse across multiple industries on both sides of the border. According to a newly released report by Ipsos Canada, 59% of Canadians now declare no buying U.S. goods, with 98% prioritizing domestic or non-American products. This has quickly been reflected in sales. Revenue at duty-free shops has dropped by 40 to 80%, especially at border points in Quebec and British Columbia. In Ontario, sales of American wines and spirits plummeted by 66.3% in just one quarter, according to the LCBO, the government-run liquor system. Key American products such as Midwest beef, Nebraska grains, and California fruits have been pushed out of major supermarket chains like Soy's, Metro, and Loblaws. Market share for American goods is disappearing faster than any previous product recall campaign, noted an import director in Toronto. Walmart Canada, with over 400 branches nationwide, has cut imports of U.S. origin food products by more than 30% in the past month. Kroger and Costco have also begun adjusting their import portfolios in response to the clear consumer shift. Many candies, cereals, and spices, previously top sellers, now have thousands of unsold units in inventory, revealed a Costco branch manager in Mississauga. In the U.S., agricultural distributors in Iowa, Ohio, and Texas are facing a drop of more than 50% in orders from Canada, a market that once accounted for nearly 1/4 of total U.S. food exports in North America. The boycott isn't limited to consumers. It has spread throughout the supply chain. Cold storage facilities in Michigan and New York are overwhelmed with excess inventory. Many food shipments have had to be destroyed due to transport delays. Food transport companies like C.H. Robinson and FedEx Freight have reported a more than 45% decline in Canadian-bound shipments over the past 2 months. Food packaging companies in Chicago and Kansas have laid off thousands of workers as factories scale down production. In the U.S., regional agricultural banks like Farm Credit Services of America are sounding the alarm. Hundreds of farm loans dependent on exports to Canada risk becoming non-performing. If the Canadian market remains frozen, more than 20,000 American farms could default within the next 6 months, warned an agricultural economist at Purdue University. Investment funds in the food, retail, and logistics sectors are also revising profit forecasts, causing stock prices of suppliers like Tyson Foods, General Mills, and Hormel Foods to drop by 8 to 12% in just 1 week. Numerous Canadian restaurants that previously used U.S. ingredients, such as USDA beef and Texas barbecue sauces, are now switching to local or French, Argentine, and Australian sources. U.S. restaurant chains in Canada like Applebee's and Outback Steakhouse have reported a decline in customers as the American flag becomes a sensitive symbol on menus. The U.S. tourism and food service industries are also facing a double blow as Canadian cross-border shopping trips to the U.S. have dropped more than 32% by car and 20% by air. According to the Canadian Border Tourism Authority, New York City lost more than 2 million international visitors, primarily from Canada and Europe, resulting in over $4 billion in revenue losses. The U.S. Travel Association estimates a tourism revenue loss between $2.1 and $6 billion, along with 140,000 job cuts in airlines, restaurants, and hotels. This is not a temporary boycott. Experts warn that the de-Americanization of consumer behavior is being fueled by political sentiment, social media, and Canada's domestic goods incentives. Professor Sylvia Dupont of the University of British Columbia remarked, "When people change purchasing behavior due to values or national sovereignty, it is hard to reverse. This is no longer just a market response, this is a political statement from consumers." Amid escalating consumer rejection from Canadians, President Donald Trump's administration has held a series of emergency meetings with the USDA, USDR, and major export corporations to protect market share against the growing anti-American goods wave. A White House spokesperson declared on July 28th, "The U.S. will not tolerate trade partners using consumer behavior as political leverage. Canadian consumer actions are clearly part of an open economic sabotage campaign." Washington is currently considering retaliatory tariffs on Canadian goods, including dairy, softwood lumber, maple syrup, and refined petroleum products. Key exports from Ottawa to the U.S. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney firmly rebuffed the U.S. accusations. Canadians have the right to choose products that align with their values, standards, and ethics. This is consumer sovereignty, not a political tool. On social media, campaigns like #BuyCanadian, #BoycottsTusa, and #FoodSovereignty are becoming powerful trends, garnering millions of shares weekly. Numerous food bloggers, influencers, and local restaurant chains are joining in by publicly sharing non-American recipes and pledging 0% ingredients sourced from the U.S. Economists warn that if the trend continues, America's food hub status in North America will collapse, ceding ground to Mexico, Brazil, and the EU. Canadian, French, and Chilean producers are expanding investments in farms and processing plants to fill the vacuum left by the U.S. Global sales of American food products may decline by 8 to 12% within 12 months, equating to billions in losses. Former White House Agriculture Advisor Richard Manning stated, "When Canada, the #1 food trade partner, turns its back, this isn't just a short-term crisis. It resets the global food supply chain map." An internal J.P. Morgan analysis forecasts that if the boycott continues through year's end, more than 12,000 American convenience stores and supermarkets will be forced to shut down, especially in border states like Minnesota, North Dakota, and Michigan. Consumer confidence in American products in Canada has hit its lowest level in 30 years, unseen even during past political crises like the Iraq War or NAFTA disputes. The stock market value of U.S. food retail giants, Walmart, Kroger, and Whole Foods, could evaporate by more than 60 to 80 billion in capitalization if the Canadian market fully collapses. The U.S. grocery industry, one of the domestic economy's most stable pillars, is undergoing an unprecedented crisis in modern history, not due to natural disaster or war, but because of consumer backlash in its neighboring country, Canada. Sales from the Canadian market, which accounts for approximately 18% of U.S. processed food exports, have dropped as much as 60% in just the first 3 months since the boycott began. Duty-free shops at U.S. and Canada border crossings report revenue declines between 40 and 80%, resulting in hundreds of permanent store closures in states like Vermont, Maine, and Washington. Nearly 3,200 grocery stores in border states are on bankruptcy alert due to the loss of Canadian customers, a group that typically spends 20% more than locals. Kevin Braxton, CEO of a mid-tier supermarket chain in Buffalo, New York, stated, "We used to survive on traffic from Ontario. Now it's just empty shelves and unpaid utility bills." An Ipsos Canada survey reveals 59% of Canadians officially declare a boycott of U.S. products, and 98% commit to prioritizing local or imports from Europe and South America. U.S. wine consumption in Ontario dropped by 66.3% in just 6 weeks, forcing multiple California brands to cancel distribution contracts with LCBO, Canada's largest liquor distributor. American beef, dairy, and packaged grains have been replaced by Canadian, Brazilian, or Australian products in retail chains, Loblaws, Metro, and Soys. Shares of major retailers like Kroger, down 17%, Albertsons, down 21%, and Walmart, down 11%, plunged in Q2. Investment banks like Morgan Stanley and Citibank issued high liquidity risk warnings for supermarket chains, with more than 20% of revenue coming from exports or international tourism. The bankruptcy rate in the U.S. food retail sector is up 240% year over year, a figure comparable to the COVID-19 crisis in 2020. Thousands of restaurants in border cities like Detroit, Seattle, and Niagara Falls, previously reliant on U.S. imported ingredients, are abandoning traditional suppliers under consumer pressure. The institutional catering sector, which depends on processed foods from the U.S., is facing mass contract cancellations from Canadian hospitals, schools, and public facilities. American fast food chains in Canada like Wendy's, Taco Bell, and Applebee's are facing peaceful protests and soft boycott campaigns, forcing them to shift supply sources to local distributors, raising costs by 12 to 35%. Previously, the U.S. supplied over 70% of processed food and premium agricultural products to the Canadian market. But following this shock, Canadian distributors are fast-tracking direct connections with farms in France, the Netherlands, Mexico, and New Zealand to build a supply network that completely bypasses American sources. Canada is also increasing investment in cold chain logistics and preservation technologies to reduce reliance on the cross-border distribution networks dominated by the U.S. Trade expert Adam Fields of the Brookings Institution commented, "This crisis is like a detox for the supply chain. Canada's consumers and government are purging U.S. dependence in just a few months." The collapse of the U.S. grocery sector is not just a story of empty shelves, but a vivid demonstration of how consumer trust can dismantle an entire industry. When your largest partner turns away and patriotism becomes a shopping habit, even the most solid economic foundations can crack within months. No bombs, no tariffs, just empty shopping carts and politically charged personal choices. Canadian consumers have sparked one of the most sweeping consumer food retail crises in U.S. and Canada trade history. And if Washington fails to find a wise solution, this wave could spread to Europe, Asia, and ultimately push the American food industry into a long-term recession, surpassing the impact of COVID-19. This isn't surface-level news. This is what's shaping the next decade. If you're someone who thinks deeper, welcome to the front row. Subscribe to Globe Chaos Insights.